Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies. Tonight is April 23rd, 2024. I want to thank you all for making it on tonight. Tonight's class is on the Spanish Civil War. Before we get started, just a couple of reminders. The People's School is initiated and sponsored by the Party of Communist USA, but it is not a party school, which is great because it allows us to have a wide variety of ideas and opinions discussed that don't necessarily reflect the party line. The People's School is also part of a long line of party-sponsored schools, such as the Workers' School, Jefferson School for Social Science, and a couple of others. And we can go ahead and pull up the presentation.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm glad that we have so many people on tonight. So this is a very content heavy class. So if y'all don't have notes or don't have something pulled up, I'd recommend you pull something up. Feel free to take notes. If you can't, that's fine. But again, this is going to be a very content heavy class. Okay, so this is going to give you a general overview of the Spanish Civil War, major battles, the reasons for the Nationalist victory and the Republican defeat. What we did as American communists, which is this will involve the Lincoln Brigade and such. I'll give you an overview of the USSR's anti-fascist foreign policy, how it related to Spain, and the Spanish Civil War's legacy today. Background. Okay, so we're not going to have time today to talk about the entire political context and background of the Spanish Republic. There's a lot of content here. I mean, you could do an entire college seminar and just an entire college seminar on this topic alone. But basically, the gist is that Spain was declared a bourgeois republic in 1931. It was a very backward state for Western Europe. It came out of a absolutist monarchy, and it was a lot more backward compared to Italy, France, and Germany and the United Kingdom. So economically, it was mainly a peasant and farmer state. It was very much agricultural. There was a lack of land reform. It was almost semi-feudal in a lot of ways. So you had a situation where Spain was coming into the 20th century, in this kind of condition without a land reform, without any autonomy for oppressed nationalities and minorities. And when the Republic was declared in 1931, some of these reforms began to take place. There was a widespread literacy campaign. There was some land reform, though it wasn't complete. And there was basic secularizations, kind of stuff you take for granted within any bourgeois democratic revolution or state. And this was absent from Spain for a long time. This led to a right-wing reaction. A lot of these reforms were reversed because the right managed to effectively win coalition governments and gain power. This was up until the 1936 Spanish election. The left in the 1936 Spanish election, following the role model of France and of Georgy Dimitrov, who said in the 7th Congress of the Comintern that a popular front was needed, meaning a united front against fascism was needed, and that was the orientation that the communists should take with organizing the left and all anti-fascist forces. So the Popular Front, the left united in Spain, and they won power in the 1936 Spanish elections. This was opposed by the right wing, and reactionary generals such as Francisco Franco, another guy named Sanjurjo, and Mola plotted a coup to destroy the republic and to win power for the right-wing forces. The coup began in Morocco, but it spread to the mainland, and this started the Civil War in July 17th, 1936. So there's a lot of acronyms and a lot of groups that we're going to be going over tonight. The most important groups for us to know as communists, of course, is the Communist Party of Spain. These were the strongest anti-fascist fighters. Without them, the Republic wouldn't have lasted a day. They helped organize the defense of the Republic, the international brigades. They helped organize, mutual aid organizations and dual power. They were very powerful within the Republic. There were also the Social Democrats, or the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party. This party actually, unlike the SPD in Germany and its counterparts in France, this was a socialist party. It may not have been Marxist-Leninist, but it did seek a socialist society. So this is more of like the old school Trotskyite and kind of reformist socialists of old, but they still sought socialism. You had Basque nationalists who fought for the Republic. And then you had two groups in this presentation, who you'll notice the label until 1937 is labeled under. These are the anarchists and the Trotskyists. Their reasons for being labeled until 1937 is that these factions betrayed the Spanish Republic and helped lead it to its eventual defeat through their actions. On the right, this is the other side of the Civil War. This, you had the Spanish nationalists. So the main parties involved here were the conservative monarchists, which were CEDA, which was the Spanish Confederation of Autonomous Rights. These were Spanish reactionary monarchists. They had a fascist aesthetic, but like they were authoritarian monarchists. You had the Requetes or Carlists. They were other monarchists, but they supported a different monarchical line in Spain. They were even more reactionary, seeking a return to feudalism and really like old Spain, which is why you'll notice the old Spanish cross emblem right there. Then you had the Falange, or the Spanish fascists, who were also national syndicalists. For those of you who don't know, fascism's origins actually lie within a branch of anarchism called national syndicalism. And basically, politically, though, these factions on the right, they called themselves Spanish nationalists, were united forcibly by Franco into the party on the bottom called the Fête de las Hondes, which is a very complicated acronym. You can call them the Falange, but this was basically just a broad, like, right-wing fascist party that Franco forced all these factions to merge into. Next slide. So, in the Spanish Civil War, I'm sorry if that map isn't that clear, but blue is Republican territory, white is nationalist territory. So the nationalist coup begins in Spanish Morocco, which Spain held as a colony. Basically, the coup begins in Morocco on July 16th, but there also is subsequent action on the mainland. The uprising spreads to the mainland. So basically, you had rural sections of the country, less industrialized, more reactionary sections of the country revolt in favor of Franco. Fascist Italy and Germany notably intervene almost immediately. Germany airlifts the Spanish Army of Africa, which is their elite colonial troops, to Spain. This is a huge deal, as this is Germany's first major foreign intervention on the world scene as a fascist country. And basically, the Spanish nationalists have a very successful start to the Civil War. They managed to take a lot of territory within the South. So you'll see over there, they spread out from Cadiz, Sevilla, Granada, major territory. Those were left-wing areas that voted for the Popular Front, but they were overwhelmed very quickly. The Spanish Republic had a ton of political factions, and this coup basically, in a sense, led to the complete collapse of the government, so to speak, to the point where the Republicans who were resisting the fascists in all but name had to rebuild a government that was anti-fascist and for the Republic. The nationalists largely held the advantage in military experience since they were all the colonial troops who were fighting against the Moroccans in the Rif War. They had better leadership, and they also had access to oil, grain, and they had a huge amount of foreign intervention on their side, ranging from direct military support from Germany and Italy to, basically policies that benefited them, such as the British policy of non-interference and American corporate support. Ford, there were other companies. I believe Texaco and Ford actually gave Franco a free credit line on oil, which helped supply his troops. The Republicans, however, during this war did hold an advantage in manpower and industry and on the sea, but this would change as the war took its course. Next slide. So, throughout October through December 1936, the nationalists, mainly taking advantage of the Republican disorder, managed to sweep large sections of southern Spain. But the resistance begins to harden as they get closer to the more working class areas in Spain. The nationalists behave how reactionaries usually do during a civil war. They do a lot of nasty massacres and crimes, which hardens Republican resolve. And by the time they get to Madrid, the Republicans are ready to fight and are starting to get their stuff together. The Spanish Republican government actually fled from Madrid to Valencia. No one expected Madrid to hold. All the foreign embassies were clearing out of Madrid in 1936. The Western democracies were debating on recognizing Franco and the nationalists, but the people of Madrid held Madrid. And they defended their capital, proclaiming no pasarán, meaning they shall not pass. The Communist Party in Spain, not realizing that militias weren't effective against the trained army of Africa, formed this unit called the Fifth Regiment. This became the nucleus of the new army that the Republic built, and this was the army that held for 3 years against the Spanish nationalists. And just in time, in October and December, the first of the international brigades from Europe began to arrive en masse. Most notably, the German Ernst Thälmann battalion. These were German communists who signed up to fight against fascists in Spain. And basically, with the advent of German communists and the people of Madrid, the city was saved in 1936. And they learned very important, you know, this was a battle that no one had seen before. There was intense urban combat, air power was being used, and it taught a lot of lessons that we would later see in the Battle of Stalingrad. Um, the International Brigade's arrival basically acted as a key stopgap for the Spanish Republic. It allowed them to organize. It gave them basically a body of manpower to help fill in plugging gaps at the line. And about 50,000 men and women served in the International Brigades. So, in terms of Soviet foreign policy, the Soviet Union was very pro-Republican Spain. It supported the Popular Front government. And in terms of material support, it sent a ton of stuff to Spain. It sent hundreds of tanks. This is just some of the statistics right here that you can read. But basically, about 405 million worth of material reached Spain. Spain paid for this material using elements of their gold reserves. And this was an equal exchange. Even bourgeois, there's a lot of Spanish nationalists who like to claim that the Republic was a puppet of the Soviet Union because it traded its gold for weapons and equipment. But even bourgeois historians who are right wing, such as Stephen Kotkin, admit that this was a fair trade given the amount of support that the Soviets gave for Spain. The Soviet Union pushed for Western democracies to do more to aid the Republic, but Britain, France, and the United States all upheld a policy of non-intervention, which in practice hurt the Republic more than the nationalists. Next slide. In terms of the other side of the intervention, there was massive fascist intervention on the side of the Spanish nationalists. Italy sent the most amount of forces, actually very much to its detriment during the Second World War. Italy sent so much equipment and troops that it actually hurt them during World War II because they weren't as prepared. They sent about 70,000 combat troops directly to help out the Spanish nationalists. They sent a ton of ammo, a ton of aircraft, and it basically amounted almost to the exact same amount of equipment that the Soviets sent. The Germans also intervened heavily. This was an opportunity for the Germans to utilize their modern aircraft and their modern arms. They took advantage of it. It was also plausible deniability since Germany was still under the Treaty of Versailles. They sent over the Condor Legion, which was a air fleet of aircraft that participated in the bombing of Guernica, which is a famous war crime and also a painting by Picasso. But they sent a smaller amount of people, about 16,000, but 200 million USD, that's the approximation for how much they spent in terms of aiding the nationalists in Spain. There's no comprehensive list of equipment. As with anything in Nazi Germany, a lot of the records were burned. So, you know, we don't know the precise list of equipment that they sent. Okay, we have a bit of video, then we'll do our first question section.
In November 1936, the defense of Madrid was near collapse.
Barricades rise on the roads to Madrid as General Franco's advancing insurgents consolidate their blood-bought gains and press on to Spain's beleaguered capital. The guns still sing their hymn of death after weeks of desperate fighting. One suburb after another is invaded by Franco's troops. One by one, the capital's outposts fall.
With Madrid on the verge of capture, help arrived from around the world. from France, Poland, Sweden, Cuba, Yugoslavia, England, and Peru. There were German and Italian volunteers, some of whom had escaped from concentration camps. From 52 countries in all, 40,000 volunteers arrived to fight alongside the Spanish workers and peasants. In America, Steve Nelson first heard about the International Brigades while organizing for the Communist Party in the coal fields of Pennsylvania.
When we read that Englishmen were going, then we said, hey, what about us? And the party committee in New York responded to that, set up a committee and sent out word to the various districts of the party, as we used to call it, various state committees, and told them that this is going on, and if there are people who would volunteer, to get in touch with them.
Recruitment for the Lincoln Brigade was done by word of mouth and through ads pretending to seek workers for Spain. This effort was organized by the Communist Party, yet many of the volunteers were not communists.
I'm not going to just sit down and let this happen. I'm going out and help, even if it is my life. But I'm helping. This is my world, too. And I'm not going to sit down and just let people do what they want to do when it's wrong. And I'm a nurse. Look at all those soldiers and all those people being hurt. Look at all the people even in Spain, young children not being bombed, taken care of, and all of that. Women, men, everybody. And I was doing crisis duty.
It seemed like a perfectly natural thing to do. I mean, I knew what oppression was. I'd had it all my life when I was a kid. And it didn't seem like any effort or took any thinking at all. I didn't need politics. I mean, they were oppressing the Spanish people, so I knew what that meant. So I wanted to go and help. Very simple.
A combination of all these things, evidently going right back to my childhood in the slums. And I was working class. I was part of the American working class. And it was an opportunity for me to fish cut bait, to join my friends and fight fascism.
Evelyn Hutchins wanted to go as a soldier, but American women were only allowed to serve as nurses. She then tried to volunteer as an ambulance driver.
I asked them if they knew how good I was at driving, and they knew because they were using me all the time. I asked them if they would have allowed me to go if I had been a man, and they admitted they would have, and even my size, as small as I am, because two of the other ambulance drivers were my size, you know. So I told them, well, if you don't let me go, then you're just a chauvinist, that's all. A male chauvinist, you're just a chauvinist. And you're not supposed to be, because you're supposed to be a political person. Well, then they would say, I'm not like that. I would let you go, but it's the others. So my attitude was, you let me take care of the others.
I was living with my cousin, and he was of exactly the same frame of mind. And he said, well, we ought to make a pact. He said that not one of us leaves without telling the other guy he's going, so that we can go together. And I said, that sounds like a winner. And then I got thinking about it, and this cousin is 3 or 4 years younger than I, and we have a tremendous family, and I think maybe I was a little more considered the radical of the two of us. And I thought, gee, if he and I leave together, and he croaks and I come back, I won't be able to face the family. I won't be able to face the family. They'll say, oh, Dave talked Jim into going, and Jim's dead, and Dave's... I won't be able to face the family. So I broke the pact. But I finally told Jim, I said, Jim, tomorrow I think I'm leaving for Spain. And he called me every kind of a son of a bitch that you can call a guy. And he was over there 10 days later.
And then when I was accepted and I was in the pipeline, so to speak, then it hit me, the enormity of what I was doing. And then I had to accommodate myself to the idea, and my mother to the idea, for instance.
And how the hell do you explain this stuff to your mother, that you're going off to possibly get killed or stuff like that? Very difficult thing. I found it very hard.
But I convinced her that I was going over there to work in a factory.
So I decided to just say, look, I'm getting on a ship and it's going to Europe. Now, sometimes we go to these ports and you don't hear from me for months and months and months. Sometimes it's out of the way place. They don't have mailboxes or mail carriers or stuff like that. So don't worry if you don't hear from me for a long time.
I sent home letters telling her what great work I was doing in the factory and so forth, and turning out all these goods for the front. Until one day I got a letter from my sister that a picture of me and Hemingway had appeared in the Jewish Daily Forwards in the Rotogravure section. Milton Wolfe, captain in the Abraham Lincoln Battalion. Blew my cover completely.
All right, with that, we'll move to our first round of discussion.
Yeah, thank you. So far, it's been great. You mentioned at the beginning about fascism origins lie in national syndicalism, which is a sect of anarchism. Can you point me to somewhere where I can get some more information about that? And then the other question that I had was, how crucial was the support of the Abraham Lincoln Brigades in at least staving off the fight for a little while and maintaining the Spanish Republic? Thanks.
Yeah, so look at the figure of George Sorel. Look at the figure of George Sorel and how he inspired Mussolini. And you'll get your, I guess, your answer. Sorel's brand of anarchism, which was called National Syndicalism, was very much focused on violence, spirituality, and kind of reactionism with a revolutionary flavor / aesthetic that was then really appropriated by Mussolini, who then used it with the squadrini and the black shirts in Italy. So,
all right, thank you, comrade.
Hey, comrade. And yeah, to answer Comrade's question, what did the Abraham Lincoln Brigade do? Along with other brigades, such as the Ernst Thälmann Brigade, and there was a brigade from every country, basically. One of their first missions they did when they got there in 36 or 37 was they fought the Battle of Madrid, and they actually held off Franco's armies. And that was kind of a shock to everybody, so that was huge. And then later, they did a whole thing that went around the country. There's the Ebro campaign. And my comment is the following, that we don't have it on New Outlook Publishers yet, but it's something we'll be working on. And I urge everybody, if you don't want to wait till we have it, but we will have it hopefully this year or next year anyway. These names here, these are Americans who wrote about their fighting in Spain. And one is named Alva Bessie, Alvah. The last name is Bessie. Men in Battle is one of his books. He wrote about 2 or 3, and he was also one of the Hollywood 10. But then the other comrade who many people don't know, whose books, in my opinion, are even better, is Edwin Rolfe, and he died in the 50s. Edwin Rolfe, Rolfe. And hopefully we'll be producing their books. Rolfe's book is the best one. He goes into all the campaigns and everything. He goes into what the Trotskyists did.
90 seconds.
Thank you, comrade. Comrade Angelo, you have the floor.
Okay, I want to say hi to everyone. I wrote down notes. I can be fast. Number 1, proxy war. This was the original proxy wars. We talk about proxy wars today with Israel and the Ukraine and who's behind them. This was the original one, all right? It was basically a dress rehearsal for World War II. Germany and Italy on one side, and on the other side was the Soviet Union, which was the main ingredient in the fight back. The United States and England came later on, but it was the Soviet Union that led that. So this was the beginning of the proxy wars. Number 2, the Donbass. I think of the Donbass and I think of areas in Spain that were held off against the central government. However, things were reversed.
60 seconds.
The central government was progressive. In Ukraine, the central government is the fascist. And third, I want you to notice the number of Jewish people. Large percentage of them came from Jewish background. You heard one of them say, I think it was Milton Wolfe, say that his mom heard about it through the Yiddish newspaper that came out of New York called the Forwards. That's what she first heard about where her son was.
90
So
seconds.
I want people not to forget that the Zionists today are not the history of the Jewish people. Today is Passover. Remember that. And it's a celebrating the struggle of resistance against an oppressed people, against an evil government. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Comrade Angelo.
Yeah, great class. Thank you for this. But I wanted to mention something that I think is significant. Another country that really helped the Republican cause was Mexico. They donated more than like 2 million in aid, and they helped a lot with exiles that eventually moved to Mexico and places like Cuba. But a lot of the Mexican government basically paid for their like journey back to Mexico or wherever they were going. So that's significant. And then this was under the time period of Lázaro Cárdenas, which is like viewed in Mexican history as like a really significant president who nationalized the Mexican oil industry. So he's one of ours.
Thank you for that.
So I know the Reichstag fire and Dimitri's writing on fascism was just a few years before this. When did we start originating our thoughts on fascism? How long has this been going on before the Spanish Civil War? Thank you.
I mean, the Comintern already recognized the threat of fascism and what fascism was as the height of monopoly capitalism and such. The only thing that really changed in our analysis was the means to counter it. We switched from a kind of ultra left position, which we had during the third period, of basically having only workers' opposition to fascism, to broadening the front, and that's where we came up with the concept of the Popular Front. So our analysis was very similar, and it didn't really change in regards to what fascism was ideologically. We only changed really our tactics and our strategy for dealing with the fascist threat.
All right, thank you for that.
Can someone put the video that we just watched, the link to it, in the chat? And also, I know it talked about a German unit that fought for the Republic. What exactly was the situations that the Germans who fought in that unit were coming from? And at least prior to the fall of the Third Reich, were any of them ever allowed to return to Germany?
Yeah, these people were German communists. These were hardcore people. These people were the cream of the crop of the German Communist Party who came over and fought with the Spanish Republic. A lot of them first went to Moscow first when Hitler first came to power, 1932, 33. Some of them, such as Hans Beimler, who was the leader of the Thälmann battalion, he actually escaped Dachau and fled all the way to Spain to fight and take command of the Ernst Thälmann Brigade. He was killed in the Battle of Madrid. These were thousands of people. Later on, after World War II, and during World War II, they served with the Red Army and the Soviets, and they worked in an organization called the National Committee Free Germany, which the Soviets set up. And most of them ended up in the DDR and served either as generals in the army, figures within state security. I mean, these were the cream of the crop.
All right.
It said that the CNT-FAI was anarchist until 34. Like I said, if this is part of the class later, don't worry about it. But what happened in 34?
The until 37 thing, that's meant to, it's not meant to reflect ideology. It's meant to reflect support for the Republic. So it's noted that the POUM and the CNT-FAI at least marginally supported the Republic until 37. We'll get to that, though.
Cool.
I'm struck by the level of class consciousness among these people that we just heard from in the film compared to today. I mean, they were willing to just up and take off to another country to fight a war that wasn't, wasn't immediately connected to them because they saw it as a working class issue. I'm trying to organize my union. I can't even get people to use the word ruling class. A lot of people are looking at it, they're like, no, you can't say that. That's scary. You know, it's just we've gone backwards in a lot of ways, and with the working class. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was mentioned, but there was also the Connolly column from Ireland that participated. They sent soldiers over, people over to fight for the Republic. And also, I would just like to say, we as communists have always supported national liberation in areas. Rest in peace to our comrade Russell Texas Bentley, who fought in Ukraine. We still have a lot of people there fighting, and it's a similar situation today. And it's a divisive issue, but it's an issue that's important, just like Spain was. I think we should try to see the connection between the two.
Thank you for that. And I'll just take maybe one or two more hands, and then we'll get back to the presentation.
Yeah, so someone said something earlier about kind of when fascism first started sprouting up. I just wanted to note a guy you might look into on that. Gabriel D'Annunzio. He was an Italian, kind of a fascist, not a fascist, more like his personality was just fascist, and he was an Italian, basically a billionaire for his time. So he just got to do stuff. And I think there's an argument to be made that he's kind of the guy that kind of showed that the ideas that were being pieced together at the time to become fascism could be put into actual practice. At least that I'm aware of. He seemed like he's the earliest guy that I'm aware of doing that in a way we would recognize as fascism.
All right, thank you for sharing that. Comrade, you have the floor.
All right, so when I first got into this call, I heard we were talking about something like the connection between anarchism and fascism. And I think Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera said himself that he actually copied the aesthetic for his blue shirts off of the CNT FAI. That sort of like red and black aesthetic, as well as the blue shirt that's supposed to so like in Spain around that era, if you were a factory worker, you wore blue, like a blue jumpsuit. You know what I mean, right? Yeah. So like I actually heard that Jose Antonio actually went out of his way to get that sort of working class aesthetic into his fascist movement to, win over people that way.
60 seconds.
And yeah, I don't know. I just thought that'd be interesting to mention.
Thank you for sharing that fact. I just wanted to say real quick, I know someone whose parents were in the CPUSA. His parents were named Eddie and Ethel Davis. And he told me that his uncle fought in the Spanish Civil War. So just something interesting I wanted to share.
Yeah. To the comrade's point earlier about how this generation had a strong sense of class consciousness compared to current generations, it's important to note that, this is a generation of Americans that really isn't around anymore. Kind of a dying breed, or really at this point, a dead breed, because, the generations that came after dealt with more, and this isn't the sole reason, but this is part of the reason, I believe, because the generations that came after grew up in times of economic stability. This is a generation that grew up in a time of economic instability. I mean, you can hear some of them even say, I came from the working class and all that sort of stuff. And so the level of class consciousness was quite more apparent in those times. So that kind of explains why they saw the injustices and they saw the reactionary forces of capital, and they're like, I have to go fight this war. Where how many people would really go fight a war against fascism nowadays, really?
All right, thank you for that. And we can now return to the presentation.
Okay, we'll be going over the year 1937 in this section. Let's get started. All right. So this is one, this is a rough part of history, but it needs to be talked about. There were a lot of atrocities during this war. This was a really, really ugly war. Civil wars tend to breed atrocities. So this is an overview of the White Terror and the quote unquote Red Terror. So during the Civil War itself, the Francoists, the fascists, the Spanish nationalists killed about 200,000 Spaniards during this war. Most of them were summarily shot and executed by Phalangists or Carlist militias with the consent of the Spanish fascist government. What usually happened is that after a battle took place for a town or the nationalists captured a local area, they would round up all the trade unionists, the communist organizers, youth leaders, and they would shoot them, usually with their families. A fascist had a term for this called el limpieza, or cleansing in Spanish, if I didn't butcher that. And this was, and again, this reaction kind of has its origins within the Spanish Inquisition and the fanaticism from there. But it was taken up to a whole nother level. Rape was used as a weapon of war against Republican women and national minorities by the nationalists very intentionally. And a lot of really infamous massacres occurred in Badajoz in 1936, where the Spanish nationalists shot 4,000 people after the town was taken in a pretty rough fight. In Granada, which is a city I've been to twice, all the men and women and children of the left-wing forces after the town was taken by the nationalists were taken out to a tiny village called Viznar, which is on the outskirts of the city, and they were shot and buried in mass graves. If any of you are familiar with Federico Lorca, or Federico Garcia Lorca, he was a famous poet and artist. He was actually killed in this massacre for his art, which was perceived as being too left-wing and revolutionary. Yeah, this basically happened in every town and city during the Spanish Civil War. If you look at the map to your right, that's every one of those dots mark a massacre or a mass grave during the Civil War. It was organized. It was it was completely extrajudicial, but it was organized. It was deliberate, and it's what reactionaries do during a Civil War. So as per the other side, for Republican atrocities, the reason I do put this under quote unquote is because the Spanish government actually didn't commit that many atrocities. Some did happen in the war, particularly during the early stages of it, while the Republic kind of lost control and a new government had to be formed. Most of the war crimes that took place in the Spanish Republican territory were actually carried out by the anarchists, that being the CNT-FAI. Nonetheless, there were crimes committed on a local level. Prominent right-wingers, religious figures, landowners, some smallholders who were rightists were targeted in the opening months of the Civil War. You have to keep in mind that this Civil War was also a class war in a lot of ways. A lot of these tensions had been building in Spain for hundreds of years with really brutal oppression of workers and peasantry. So there were excesses on the Republican side. But it is notable that the Republican government and the Spanish Communist Party did its best to contain the excesses of the anarchists with some success. Courts were established in Republican Spain, which put an end to extrajudicial killings after the first couple months. But a lot of the damage, unfortunately, from Republican atrocities was spread in the news abroad, whereas nationalist atrocities, major newspapers like CBS and New York Times and other papers did not cover nationalist atrocities that much compared to Republican atrocities. The Catholic Church played a role in spreading propaganda about Republican Spain and its so-called crimes. And the anarchists didn't help this, since the anarchists actually did target religious institutions. This created a sense amongst a lot of Catholics that the Republic was anti-Catholic, which wasn't true. They were anti-nationalist, they were anti-trader, they weren't anti-religious. According to most historians, the death toll for the Red Terror Republican atrocities is around 38,000, which it's bad, but it's nowhere near the level of the nationalist atrocities during the war. Right below there, below this, the text is a quote by actually a nationalist politician who witnessed the atrocities on both sides and basically said that the Nationalists were organized, deliberate, and were completely methodical, whereas the Republicans were just more chaotic, and the Republicans tried to stop most of the atrocities. So, next slide. So, in the anarchist zones of the Republic, basically, the anarchists who formed up the CNTFAI had effective control over Catalonia from 1936 to 37. This was because of the collapse of the Republican government, and it basically had to be reformed into, a wartime government to fight against the fascists. There was a lot of excess and disorder in these territories. It really undermined the Republican government on the international scene, and even to its own citizens. There was basically an ultra left ineffective collectivization during a wartime, which obviously has negative results, and basically it alienated a lot of people that otherwise would have supported the Republic during this time in the fight against fascism. Basically, the CNTFAI, think of it as if like a bunch of kids from Model UN took like America Collapsed Tomorrow, and the kids from Model UN tried to run their local government and tried to LARP, that. And this is the results that you would get. There was poor coordination within the CNT militias. They attempted an offensive toward Zaragoza, which was taken by the nationalists, but they were playing revolution and were LARPing, and basically the offensive was broken up. The CNT-FAI system of militias was extremely ineffective. They refused to take part in a centralized Republican army, so that's why they used militias instead of an actual army. They held democratic elections to engage in an offensive operation, or if they should do their duties or do their orders, which of course doesn't work in any military discipline. To make matters worse, in May 1937, the CNT-FAI, alongside the Trotskyist/Bukharinist Workers' Party in Spain, started a uprising in May of 1937 against the government. The uprising and this ultra-left behavior was put down by the government, but this destabilized the situation and did not help the Republican government, and it basically helped undermine the Popular Front. Next slide. So there were a lot of major battles that occurred in 1937. The first one, which was actually the first battle that American troops took part in the Lincoln Brigade, was the Battle of Jarama, which was from January to February. Basically, the Nationalists, after failing to take Madrid directly in 1936, attempted to encircle the city. So Jarama was an offensive to the south of Madrid. You can see to the right on that map that Jarama is to the south of Madrid. They attempted to take the city and basically cut it off, and basically cut the highway which connected Madrid and Valencia, preventing Republican reinforcements. They failed, mainly due to Republican counterattacks. A lot of the international brigades were thrown into really what can only be described as a meat grinder. And on the first day, actually, of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade being sent in, we lost about like 127 Americans were killed on the first day alone, and like 144 were wounded. So like we suffered like almost 66% casualties total on the first day in the Lincoln Brigade, which was devastated and had to be rebuilt. The leader of the Lincoln Brigade, Robert Merriman, was actually the first leader of the Lincoln Brigade. Robert Merriman was actually killed in this battle. And there's a song called Jarama Valley, which is to the tune of Red River something. And it was a really brutal battle. The next major battle was the Battle of Guadalajara. So after the Nationalists failed to encircle it from the south, they tried the same thing up north. They mainly threw Italian units that were in there supporting the Nationalists, but they actually were not expecting such Republican resistance. The Republicans counterattacked, and it routed the Italian fascists. Actually, a lot of the Italian fascist troops, after being encircled, defected to the Republic, because the Italian International Brigade, called the Garibaldi Brigade, was brought forward to the line to propagandized amongst the fascist troops, and a lot of the fascist troops defected and joined the Republic. This was deeply embarrassed Mussolini, and Mussolini actually vowed that no Italian will return home from Spain until they win a battle to make up for the shame of Guadalajara. And finally, in July of 1937, there was the Battle of Brunetti. This was a Republican counterattack that you can see on the map right there. That's the Battle of Brunetti. Basically, it was an attempt to cut the Madrid-Extremadura highway and basically secure the city and drive away the nationalists. It had mixed results. It did gain some land, but it came at a very heavy cost. A lot of Soviet tanks were lost in this battle, which was really bad. And strategically, it can be viewed as a defeat. Throughout all these battles, the best Spanish general that we had for the Republic was the guy whose picture is on the bottom right of the screen, Enrique Lister. He would later fight in World War II and actually would later become an advisor to Fidel Castro after the Cuban Revolution. Next slide. So in 1937, there was the May Day riots organized by the anarchists and the Trotskyists. After they were crushed, this led to a change in the Republican government. Largo Caballero, who was from the Spanish Workers' Party or the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, who were the Social Democrats, resigned. And he was replaced by Juan Negrin, who was more of a wartime president. Negrin's slogan was "All for the Front," and he was very much supported by the Spanish Communist Party. The Spanish Communist Party had a reciprocal relationship with Negrin. The Spanish Communist Party helped build up new Republican institutions such as the Popular Army, the commissars within the Republican Army, and the People's Intelligence Services, which acted as police in order to stabilize the situation. You can think of them kind of like as the NKVD during this period. But the anarchist putsch in 1937 in Barcelona still had its consequences. And they basically had to be forcibly integrated into the Republican Army. And this didn't go over too well, but it happened nonetheless. And this was a government for victory. The focus was to defeat the fascists, and then after the people's victory, to then build socialism. Next slide. So briefly, we'll go over the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. There should be an entire class dedicated to this, frankly speaking. There's a lot of history here. We have personal connections to it. I know people on this call who have met people from the Abraham Lincoln Brigades. So this is a history of our party. It's a history of American communism, but without going too much into it, 3,000 American volunteers went to fight against fascism in Spain. About 700 died, and about another 1,000 were wounded. 80% of the volunteers who went over to Spain were members of the Communist Party. More than half of them were immigrants or children of immigrants, so first-generation immigrants. And most notably for American history, this was actually the first unit of American troops that was completely integrated and had actually black officers commanding white troops. This was unheard of, and it wouldn't be until the 1950s that the U.S. fully integrated its army. So the 15th Brigade, the American Lincoln Brigade was part of the 15th International Brigade, which was the American-speaking International Brigade. So this was the brigade that had Canadian, Irish, and British volunteers. These men fought in the battles of Jarama, which I went over earlier, Brunetti, Belchite, Teruel, and the Ebro. So after that, we'll go to discussion now, second round. Again, please try and keep your comments limited since this is a very content-heavy class.
All right, Comrade, you have the floor.
Yes, I was wondering if you could give a definition of LARPing, especially for some of our old comrades, and maybe a little bit of context of.
Yeah, so LARPing stands for live action role play. And that's basically what these anarchists did. They played revolution. They waved their flags. They stood with guns at barricades. And if you read some of the history of this, I mean, it's really crazy. The anarchists were so undisciplined that they would go home right after the battles. They would go to the barricades for a day, then go home and have a meal cooked for them by their significant other, and then sleep, and then go back to the front lines. I mean, there was no order, no discipline. There were people who paid to dress up in a uniform for a day, take a pot shot at the nationalist lines, then took off their uniform and went back to Barcelona and just worked like normally. This is not how an army's supposed to run. And there was more of this, of course, within the industrial and agricultural fields. And overall, it was detrimental to the situation on the front. It was detrimental to the Republican government, and it destabilized Spain.
60 seconds.
All right, thank you for that.
Yes, like I think like they had integrated military units in the American Revolutionary Army, and also who was that guy whose picture was on the other slide, like who said became an advisor to Castro?
Yeah, his name was Enrique Lister. So
Lister, like
Lister. Yeah, Enrique Lister. Yeah.
Okay. And who was he again?
He was one of Republican Spain's top generals. He was also a member of the Communist Party of Spain.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Yes, I have a question. How did the Franklin Roosevelt and his administration view the situation in Spain? Thank you.
Yeah, so Roosevelt, during his early part of his administration, passed the Neutrality Act, which basically, this wasn't in response to Spain, but this was before, which basically forbid the U.S. from getting involved in like foreign conflicts, selling arms, etc. Roosevelt was torn. Like all things with Roosevelt, Eleanor, his wife, was, the better Roosevelt. Eleanor was pro-Republic. She spoke at Spanish Republican aid events. She did a lot. But ultimately, Roosevelt's hands were basically tied by the Neutrality Act. There was also stuff going on. There was also factionalism within the Democratic Party. A significant faction of the Democratic Party, particularly surrounding this guy called Al Smith. There was a big Catholic wing of the Democratic Party that was anti-Republican Spain because of the black propaganda that the news and the media spread about Republican Spain and its attacks upon religious institutions. So basically his hands were tied, and the Neutrality Act, and the Neutrality Act basically prevented him from helping out the Republic along with factions within the Democratic Party.
Thank you for that.
So, as somebody who has actually known people from Catalonia, and ones who took place in the 2017 independence protests, Catalonia sort of has this weird history where they sort of revere, despite, the CNT-FAI being anarchist, they sort of have this weird history where they like revere the CNT-FAI as like national heroes, and sort of just like sweep under the rug, all the bad things that they did. And it's sort of like, because of like Franco's post-war repression against Catalonian speakers, they sort of see them as like a what's the word? Is like an ethnic struggle, kind of. That's what I've sort of been told by people who live in Catalonia, who are like kind of separatists.
60 seconds.
Thank you for that. Comrade Angelo, you have the floor.
I want to mention two things that were mentioned tonight and clarify some of them. The church hierarchy was pro-fascist. The Pope was a pro-fascist. Pope Pius the 23rd was the one who supported the Anschluss in Germany. He was the one that was basically said that the Jews killed Christ. Therefore, they should not be let go of anything. They're responsible for killing Christ. That all came from that kind of mindset. You have to understand that. There were atrocities against the church, and nuns were violated. This is not my view. But it happened because the leadership of the church was against the Republic and was supporting fascism. So we have to remember that. That's why the rank and file, the neighborhood priest, and the nuns on the local level became victims of what the leadership did. And number two, the uprising. Well, you have to remember about
60 seconds.
Anarchists. They were not bad people. They were good people. It was their ideology that their leadership brought out that destroyed them. The ideology was against Lenin. Lenin's ideology, and all of our viewpoint, is that you support wars of national liberation first. Then, once that happens, then you go years later into wars of social revolution, social wars.
90 seconds.
And that's where the communist revolution would come in. The anarchist view is very different. You get rid of the monarchy and you set up communism tomorrow morning. That was their view. And everything they did was colored by that. So that's why they became subjectively traitors to the Republic. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think I would like to add, American traitors in this situation. You had people like Raber, who were dealing with the nationalist government in violation of the Neutrality Act already brought up earlier. And he was essentially extending credit to a nation at war. That was his violation. But also, he was handing over intelligence about oil tankers that were going to Republican ports as well. In addition to also, a lot of the planes that the Nazis were using and the tanks, were also using fuel
60 seconds.
that he was giving out for cheap to the fascists as well.
Thank you for sharing that, comrade. Do you have the floor?
Late war, 38-39. Okay. The Teruel offensive. This was a battle that happened from December 1937 to February 1938. It was a Republican offensive, basically intending to, you can see on that map, Teruel is located in the northeast of Spain, to like kind of cut it off and basically prevent the front from advancing and threatening a nationalist breakthrough to the Mediterranean. This was a really intense battle, very urbanized, very brutal, very much alike stuff we saw later in the Second World War in the Battle of Kharkov, Stalingrad, and other locations. Teruel switched hands multiple times, and due to the cold conditions and the cold weather, it was really nasty. This was the coldest winter that Spain had had in 20 years. Basically it was an attrition-based battle, and unfortunately the Republic wasn't in a position where it could fight in a mass attrition warfare against the nationalists who were being supported by all these foreign powers and who didn't have to deal with as much of financial constraints and economic problems as the Republicans had to deal with. So this led to the Republicans losing this battle, and as a result they fell back, and the Basque Country was conquered in 1937 as well. This gave the nationalists a huge advantage, and this allowed them to begin to produce with industrial goods, and it basically made them equal to the Republic, and it really, really hurt the war effort to the point where the tide kind of turned with this battle for the worse. Next slide. So following up on the Battle of Teruel, which was a disaster for the Republic, the fascists began an offensive which ran from March to April. This overwhelmed the Republic. It smashed through Aragon, and it conquered parts of the Catalonia and the Levante. The fascists, of course, were very much assisted by foreign powers, and they took advantage of the air supremacy provided to them by the Italians and the Germans. While the anarchist units, which were very undisciplined, even when they were basically forced conscripted into the Republican Army, then the anarchist units weren't able to hold up to snuff from the nationalists. Republicans took a lot of losses from Teruel, and Soviet aid was really hard to obtain at this time, and it was beginning to dry up. And basically, air supremacy and just the amount of like fascist intervention kind of sweep this battle. So as a result of the Aragon offensive in 1938, the nationalists cut the Republic in two. And on the right, you can see a picture of the village of Belchite. After it was destroyed, it was never rebuilt. It's become a memorial to the Civil War. So this was the last major battle of the war, the Ebro offensive. This was the last attempt of the Spanish Republic to, try and turn the war around and save the Republic. The goal of the offensive was to reconnect the Spanish territory that had been cut as a result of the nationalists breaching the Mediterranean. Initially, the battle actually was successful for the Republic. They managed to cross the Ebro and they gained a lot of land. But the nationalists brought in their air power. They redirected armored forces. And basically, again, like Teruel, it was a pitched battle of attrition. And under the conditions that the Republic were under, they weren't prepared and weren't able to fight these pitched battles of attrition like the nationalists were. So it ended in a defeat for the Republic, and this was the last battle of the major battle of the Spanish Civil War. And we have a tiny video in which veterans talk about it.
You give it everything you possibly can. You go out there with no shoes on. You go out there in alpargados. You go out there without an overcoat. You want to win. You don't get cold, you don't get hot, you stick, you stay. You want to win, that's what it means. I've been so cold my hands I couldn't open them up. But I didn't mind the cold. We want to win. Other people, they want to win. Slept under a little bit of straw. No blanket over you, but you're gonna win. Wearing a pair of overalls. And it's cold in Spain, it's very cold in Spain. But you want to win and you stay.
Though many thought the war was probably lost, the Lincolns, with the Spanish army, rallied their forces in the spring of 1938 and spent months training for an attack across the Ebro River. This was a final, desperate attempt to change the course of the war. Caught by surprise, the fascist armies scattered before the Republicans. But a rebel counterattack overwhelmed the Republicans, forcing them into retreat. With few options left, the Republic decided to withdraw all the international brigades. Their futile hope was that world pressure would then force Franco to withdraw his foreign troops as well. The war was to last 5 months longer. But for the Lincolns, it had come to an end. Half of the 3,200 Americans were dead. In October 1938, the surviving members of the international brigades gathered in Barcelona for a farewell parade.
The war was on. There was no victory. There was an imminent defeat. But you didn't think of terms of defeat under those conditions because the people were there. The people were cheering us on, almost as though we were going in the battle instead of coming out of battle. And I think that's what it was. That's what enabled us to leave in good spirits, or to that extent, so that we felt that, well, hell, we were going to carry on a fight on another front, even if it wasn't in Spain.
Yeah. Okay. That was Milton Wolfe speaking. He was the last commander of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and he actually died not too long ago, in like I think 2009-ish. So here's the coup de grace. So the Republic, and this is something that many people do not know, the Republic was stabbed in the back. In 1939, March, a general named Segismundo Casado. Basically, this faction came to the conclusion that the only thing stopping the fascists were the communists. And, if the Republic just got rid of the communists, it could negotiate a fair peace and everything could be peaches and green. So this faction of defeatists included anarchists, liberals, and basically people who wanted to get rid of the communist influence within the Popular Front government of Juan Negrin. So this general organized a coup, and he overthrew Negrin in a coup. He assumed power. He literally called Negrin up and basically said, "Hey, you're no longer the prime minister." And him and several generals took control of the country and formed the Casado government. Basically, the nationalists, after this coup happened, completely took advantage of it and immediately started a offensive. Casado tried to surrender to the nationalists and negotiate with them, but the nationalists only demanded unconditional surrender. Negrin, after facing betrayal from his government and on the run from Casado, fled the country. The communists in Madrid were the only people to resist this coup. There was armed fighting in Madrid. Another battle for Madrid erupted, right by the front lines, as the communists tried to save the city from the fascists and these turncoats, these traitors, these fifth columnists. But unfortunately, they failed and they weren't able to stop Casado's coup. Next slide. So Casado's betrayal ultimately was the death nail for the Republic. It completely destabilized what remained left of the Republican line and government. Franco and the Nationalists advanced across the entire front, and basically military units began surrendering left and right. Madrid fell to Franco and the Nationalists without a shot on March 28th. And by the start of April, the war was completely over. A refugee crisis then ensued with 500,000 Spanish Republicans fleeing the country. A lot of them from 1939 to 1940 and even onward were detained indefinitely in refugee camps in southern France with really terrible conditions. Next slide. So our last section for this class will be the legacy. Spain during World War II was not neutral. It was involved. The only reason it didn't, Franco's Spain, which was a fascist country, didn't join the Axis was because of connections to the British and British businessmen, which Franco and his forces had prior to and during the Civil War. It did work with Hitler in the Axis on multiple occasions, though. Franco sent a unit of Spanish troops to fight against the Soviet Union alongside the Nazis in the invasion in 1941. They called this division the Blue Division. The Blue Division, which was entirely Spaniard, it was made up of mainly members of the Falange, or the Spanish Fascist Party. It played a key role in actually encircling Leningrad and is responsible there and for a lot of the deaths the Soviet civilians suffered due to the blockade of Leningrad. But after heavy casualties and getting its ass kicked by the Red Army, including former Spanish Republicans, a lot of Spanish Republicans in exile joined the Red Army and fought with it. Dolores Ibarruri, who was the general secretary of the Spanish Communist Party, her son joined the Red Army and fought and died in World War II. So as a result, this division was withdrawn in 1944 back to Spain. It's also important to note that Spanish Republicans also played a role in the liberation of France and the French resistance. Spanish Republicans were key organizers in the French Maquis. And in North Africa, a lot of Spanish Republicans joined a division called the Second Armored Division under French General Leclerc. And this was the first division that liberated Paris. And in the liberation of Paris, a lot of people noticed that, they were not only flying the French flag on the American trucks that were going through the Arc de Triomphe to the Eiffel Tower, they were flying Republican flags as well, Spanish Republican flags. A lot of Spanish Republicans, unfortunately, were captured by the Germans when the Germans defeated France in 1940, and a lot of Spanish Republicans died in the Holocaust and were targeted specifically for their politics. And on the right is a picture of Franco and Hitler meeting. So you can see that. All right, next slide. Spain today, in the Cold War and the present. Franco's regime was a brutal regime. It was a fascist regime. It banned all the trade unions, banned the Communist Party, The only party that was legal was the Fête de la Honnes, which was basically Franco's personal party, which had fascist aesthetics, pretended to be monarchists, and had its own kind of weird syncretic ideology that can be described as fascism with Spanish characteristics. Franco made a couple cosmetic reforms in the 1950s. He renamed the party to the Movimiento Nacional, which means national movement, in order to, prevent from being accused of being a fascist by Western powers. But it's not like the Western powers really cared. Spain wasn't officially a part of NATO until 1982, but in practice it was. Franco hosted American bases as early as the 50s. The Soviets had tried to block Franco with Spain from joining the UN, but they were overruled and they joined the UN in the middle of the 1950s. They were one of the most anti-communist countries in Europe. Eventually, though, in 1973, Franco appointed a successor named Luis Carrero Blanco to basically continue the fascist regime. But Blanco was actually assassinated by ETA, who were Basque separatists and partisans and resistance fighters. He was basically, how they did this is ETA, the Basque group, planted a bomb underneath a street, and when his car went over, the road, they blew it up, and and there was so much explosives packed in that they blew his car onto the rooftop of the adjoining building, which is why there's a joke that he's Spain's first astronaut because he was blown into space, so to speak. Franco died in 1975, but he restored the monarchy before his death. The monarch, Juan Carlos, recognizing the need for the bourgeoisie to evolve in Spain in order to prevent a communist revolution or something like the Carnation Revolution, which occurred in Portugal, turned Spain into a bourgeois monarchy. And today, Spain is a bourgeois monarchy. It's part of NATO, and it's also a key supporter of Morocco against our comrades in Western Sahara. On the left is a picture of Franco with Gerald Ford. So, Spanish Civil War in our tradition. On the left, we last Sunday went to Arlington Cemetery, and we actually located the graves of Spanish Republicans, or not Spanish Republicans, but Lincoln Brigade members. And there are actually 14 Lincoln Brigade members buried in Arlington National Cemetery. It was with us too. It was nearing Marshall Meyer's cell. And we placed flags at the graves of these heroes, these American heroes. And we uphold this legacy. We uphold the legacy of the Lincoln Brigade, of the anti-fascist struggle in the Spanish Civil War. And we highly encourage members of this party learn more about this topic. It's very important. So here's some resources. In terms of documentaries, you can find all these on YouTube. There's a really good BBC-produced 6-part documentary called The Spanish Civil War. The Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archive, which is an organization located out of New York, produced a documentary that we showed a couple times during this presentation called The Good Fight. It's only an hour, 30 minutes. I highly encourage everyone to watch it. It's a great documentary. There's also a YouTuber who produced a really good documentary called The Battle for Madrid, 1936, which goes over how basically the Republic held off the nationalists. In terms of books, please do note that most of these books, besides Fraser and Carroll, are by bourgeois historians. Anthony Beevor wrote a pretty good book on Spain, but he is a bourgeois historian who's done distortions and slandered the Red Army repeatedly in his books on Stalingrad and the Battle of Berlin. So be wary of Beevor, but his book on Spain isn't that bad. The Blood of Spain is a good first-person account book. It goes over multiple perspectives. That's by Ronald Fraser. He's a Trotskyite, and it does show in his perspectives and his writing, but it is a very good overview, and it goes over a lot of good accounts. The best book here, though, is The Odyssey of the Lincoln Brigade. It's the best book, hand down, about the Lincoln Brigade, except for the one produced by Edwin Rolfe. This was made by Peter Carroll, who is actually still alive today and is active within the Abraham Lincoln Brigade archives. In terms of organizations, honestly, the only organizations that still honestly care at all about the Abraham Lincoln Brigades or the Spanish Civil War is the Abraham Lincoln Brigade archives, which you can visit their website. They're pretty good. They stand for ALBA. They're the direct successor to the Friends of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which was the Communist Party USA sponsored organization which was these veterans and their supporters, and our party, Party of Communist USA. I don't see any other communist parties, the so-called communist parties in the United States, talking about this history and the struggle and, this history. Not unrelated, there is unfortunate news about a comrade who's fought, continuing the legacy of the Lincoln Brigade and fought in an anti-fascist war. Comrade Russell Texas Bentley has fallen. He was an American communist volunteer in the Donbass People's Republic. He went there in 2014 to fight against the Nazi coup regime. He was part of a communist unit within the Donetsk People's Republic called the Vostok Battalion, and he was part of the Sut Vremeni unit, which means essence of time. He's passed, and it's sad. If you want to support, we actually, before he passed, he actually wrote a book called The Donbass Cowboy. It's a war journal, goes over his experience. And we helped publish it as New Outlook. We're the only publisher that carries this book. And a portion of the proceeds do go to Russell's family. So yeah, if you want to give that, if you want to pick up the Donbass Cowboy, now is probably a good time, considering the situation that his family is going through. So that's a bit of unfortunate news, but it needs to be said with this class. And I believe now is time for our last round of discussion.
Yes, we have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, first I want to thank for a beautiful presentation and also for honoring Texas, our brother and comrade that is gone, just like the Lincoln Brigade volunteers did. So I wanted to mention Dolores Ibarruri, did earlier. So she's that famous communist that helped in the Battle of Madrid, in 1936 in the summer, and she came up with that slogan that's famous: "No pasarán," they shall not pass, and also better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. Right now, her son, he was 16 years old, and he fought in the Spanish Civil War. Okay, and at the time he met this guy, famous Soviet commander named Alexander Rodimtsev. He met him, and later Ruben went to the Soviet Union. Of course, Rodimtsev went back too. And
60 seconds.
In the 62nd Army, Rodimtsev was the commander of the 13th Division that took Mamain Kurgev, the mountain, the hill there in Stalingrad. And Ruben died at age 22 in that battle. So that's the story of Dolores Ibarruri.
All right, thank you for that.
Yeah, I thought this was a great presentation. And I think, of course, when we look back at this history, it does remind us of the present with what's going on in Ukraine and what's been going on in Ukraine for 8 years and what's going on in Palestine, too. You look at the ruins of Guernica and it easily reminds you of the ruins of Gaza. And just on that, I remember one of the comrades I was talking to not too long ago was basically commenting on how galvanized different generations get for different big things that happen in time. And, the silent generation, I guess it would be at that time, the Spanish Civil War was their thing. For the boomers, it was Vietnam. For Gen X, to a lesser extent, the bomb freeze campaign, millennials, Iraq War. And then Gen Z has Palestine. And this is one of those things that I think is really relevant. And, the Spanish Civil War was also what's considered a pre-war conflict to World War II along the lines of the Italian invasion of Ethiopia and the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. And I think we can look at what's happening in Ukraine and in Palestine as similar things in our own timeline. Pre-war conflicts to a possible third world war, which we all hope to prevent.
Thank you for sharing. Comrade Angela, you have the floor.
Okay. What Comrade said, I'm not going to say because she repeated what I was going to say about the generations. But you outdid yourself tonight. You really did. You did fantastic. I'm very proud of you as an old man. And you're a young person. The other thing is, Alba, I give them $100 a year. I get their magazine, which is called A Volunteer. I suggest everybody here do that. They need the money. They operate and they do great work. The other thing is, I had the pleasure of knowing in my 20s Esther Davis and her husband, Eddie. They were the best. I'd love to have a chance to talk to their son about their parents. I knew him for years. He came to Staten Island and fought against building a home port here. Eddie and Esther came to our demonstrations. And so I have a special place in my heart. They were the builders. When I was in the CP for 42 years, they were there. And they were the builders of that party, along with many of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
Yeah. Awesome class. Rest in peace to our comrade Russell Texas Bentley. I wanted to add something really quick on modern Spain. So if anyone's curious of what modern Spain is like under the monarchy as well, there's a communist rapper in Spain called Pablo Hazel, and he came out with a song where he criticized the monarchy, calling Juan Carlos a mafia boss, and the monarchy actually sent him to prison. So yeah, like Franco's legacy still lives on in modern Spain.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you for all your insightful comments, comrades.
Thank you for watching this full-length class from the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies. For more information or to join our free classes, visit our website, check out our YouTube, listen to our streams on Spotify, and chat with us on Reddit.